The silence in the ship's mess hall shattered as Varley dropped his backpack onto the steel table with a heavy thud, causing his alien crewmates to pause mid-conversation and stare. The Viridian ambassador, Jex, with his 4 violet eyes blinking in unison, was the first to break the silence. "You still carry that primitive container everywhere. I thought humans had evolved past such inefficiencies," Jex said, his translator giving his words a metallic quality. Jack didn't look up as he settled into his seat. Old habits die hard. The Viridian made a whistling sound that the translator didn't bother converting the alien equivalent of a scoff. Around the table, the other non-human crew members exchanged glances, some amused, others bewildered. "Humans and their attachments to physical objects," said Mila, a blue-skinned Altarian whose slender fingers wrapped around a nutrient cube. "Our neural implants store everything we need." "The backpack stays with me," Jack said firmly, pulling it closer. Ryden, the ship's Procyon captain, waved a webbed hand dismissively. "Let the human keep his security blanket. We depart for Nexus 9 in 3 hours. I expect everyone at their stations." As the crew dispersed, Jack felt a gentle tap on his shoulder. It was Dr. Lena Zorith, the ship's Centaurian medical officer. Unlike the others, her expression showed curiosity rather than mockery. "May I ask what you carry that is so important?" she asked, her voice soft and melodic. Jack hesitated. "Just essentials. Things I might need." "For what contingency?" "The Nebula Voyager has everything required for our diplomatic mission." "Let's just say I've learned to be prepared," Jack replied, zipping the backpack closed. "Better to have something and not need it than need it and not have it." Lena's skin shimmered with a pattern that indicated mild confusion, but she nodded respectfully. "A human philosophy I have not encountered before. Interesting." Later, as Jack stowed the backpack beneath his bunk in his quarters, he ran a mental inventory of its contents. Water purification tablets, high-calorie ration bars, multi-tool, first aid kit, portable shelter, fire starter, tactical knife, cord, small electronics repair kit, universal translator backup, paper maps of Nexus 9 main regions, and a few personal items. Standard equipment for any experienced diplomat who'd served on enough volatile worlds to know that ship amenities weren't guaranteed. The Nebula Voyager was on a routine diplomatic mission to Nexus 9, a newly discovered planet that had requested Federation membership. As Earth's representative, Jack was tasked with initial cultural exchange and assessment. Standard procedure, low risk at least according to the mission brief. The ship's intercom crackled. "All crew to stations, preparing for hyperspace jump." Jack secured his quarters and headed to the bridge. The backpack stayed under his bunk. The Nebula Voyager's jump to hyperspace went smoothly, almost too smoothly. Jack had been on enough ships to know when a jump felt off, and this one did. Too quiet, too smooth. No subspace turbulence at all. "Captain, did you notice anything unusual about the jump?" Jack asked as he monitored the diplomatic channels at his station. Ryden's gill slits flared slightly. "Nothing of concern, human. Our ship uses the latest Procyon technology. Smoothness is a feature, not a concern." Jack nodded but couldn't shake his unease. Something about the readings on his console showed discrepancies minimal but present. The projected coordinates didn't quite match the actual readings. They were off by a few parsecs. Before he could voice his concerns again, the ship shuddered violently. Alarm klaxons blared. "Subspace anomaly," shouted Trill, the Arctarian navigator. "We're being pulled off course. Stabilize," Ryden commanded, his webbed hands flying across the controls. "Cannot compensate." Trill's exoskeleton rattled with stress. "Unknown gravitational field." Jack gripped his console as the ship lurched again. Emergency lights flashed, bathing the bridge in pulses of red. Through the view screen, he watched hyperspace distort and twist unnaturally, the usual blue-white streams bending toward a dark mass. "All hands, prepare for emergency reversion to normal space," Ryden announced shipwide. The ship convulsed one final time before a blinding flash filled the view screen. When Jack's vision cleared, a planet loomed before them, gray-green and angry with swirling storms. "Where are we?" Jack asked, checking his readings. "This isn't Nexus 9. Trill's manipulator appendages worked frantically. Unknown system. Sensors detecting Class X environmental conditions on the planet. Atmosphere is oxygen-nitrogen but contains high levels of toxic compounds." "And we're being pulled toward it," Ryden added grimly. "Main engines offline. Auxiliary power at 40% and dropping." "Can we send a distress signal?" asked Jex, the Viridian ambassador who had earlier mocked Jack's backpack. "Negative," replied Mila from the communications station. "Something's interfering with subspace transmissions." Jack felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Class X meant extreme danger, a Deathworld by any measure. As he looked around the bridge, he saw the same realization dawning on his alien colleagues' faces. "We have no choice but to attempt landing," Ryden decided. "Prepare for emergency descent. All crew to crash positions." As the others rushed to secure systems and prepare for impact, Jack sprinted for his quarters. He heard Jex call after him. "Where are you going, human? We need all hands." Jack didn't bother responding. He had seconds, not minutes. He reached his quarters, grabbed the backpack from under his bunk, and was halfway back to the bridge when the ship hit the upper atmosphere. The jolt threw him against a bulkhead. Pain lanced through his shoulder, but he kept his grip on the backpack. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as he stumbled back to the bridge. Heat shields failing. Someone shouted as Jack strapped himself into his station, the backpack clutched between his knees. "Brace for impact." Ryden's voice was steady despite the chaos. Jack closed his eyes as the ship plummeted toward the surface. The last thing he saw before impact was Jex staring at the backpack with newfound interest. The crash was violent. Metal tore, systems exploded, and the ship's hull groaned as it plowed into the surface of the unknown world. Jack's restraints dug into his chest and his head snapped forward, then back. Pain flared in his neck and shoulder. Something warm trickled down his forehead, blood. When the ship finally stopped moving, an eerie silence fell, broken only by the hiss of escaping gases and the crackle of electrical fires. Jack blinked, trying to clear his vision. The bridge was in shambles. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow. "Status report," Ryden croaked from his captain's chair, one of his arms hanging at an unnatural angle. "Hull breaches on decks 3 through 6, reported Mila, blood of a dark blue hue seeping from a cut on her scalp. "Environmental systems offline. Life support operating on emergency backup." "Outside atmosphere?" Jack asked, unstrapping himself with shaking hands. Trill, whose exoskeleton had protected him from the worst of the impact, checked the damaged sensor readouts. "Toxic. High concentrations of sulfur compounds, chlorine, and unknown biological agents. Temperature 42 degrees Celsius. Humidity 90%. Perfect," Jack muttered, pulling his backpack onto his lap and unzipping it. "What is that going to do for us now?" Jex asked weakly from where he lay half-pinned under a fallen support beam. His violet eyes were dimmer than usual. "Your primitive container won't save us from a Class X Deathworld." Jack ignored him, pulling out a compact air filtration mask. "This planet might not be Nexus 9, but I've been to enough hostile worlds to prepare for the worst." He also extracted several more masks of varying shapes. These should fit most of the crew's respiratory systems. Lena Zorith had managed to free herself from her station and was checking on injured crew members. Her own arm was bleeding from a deep gash. "The medbay is destroyed," she reported. Most of our medical supplies were there. Jack nodded and pulled out a comprehensive first aid kit from his backpack. This has broad-spectrum antibiotics, pain relievers compatible with most known species, wound sealant, and nano-bandages. The crew stared as he continued extracting items. Water purification tablets, a compact shelter generator, emergency rations formulated for various digestive systems, a multi-spectrum communication device, and more. Jex began, his translator struggling to convey his astonishment. "You carry all this with you? For what purpose?" "For exactly this purpose," Jack replied, handing the first aid kit to Lena. "My first diplomatic posting was on Gamma Hydri Roman 4. Our ship crashed due to an ion storm. 3/4 of the crew died before rescue arrived, not from the crash, but from being unprepared for the environment. He moved to help free Jex from the debris. Since then, I never travel without essentials." "The backpack everyone mocked," Ryden observed, wincing as Lena set his broken arm. "It contains everything we need to survive a Deathworld." "Not everything," Jack corrected, "but enough to improve our odds until rescue comes." As if to emphasize the danger they faced, the ship creaked ominously. Through a crack in the view screen, Jack could see an alien landscape of twisted gray-green vegetation under a yellowish sky. In the distance, something large moved through the mist. "First priority, seal the hull breaches and establish a safe zone," Jack said, taking charge naturally despite not being the captain. "Then we assess injuries, inventory remaining supplies, and set up communications to call for help." Ryden nodded, deferring to Jack's experience. "Make it happen." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The crew worked to seal the worst hull breaches, using emergency foam from Jack's supplies combined with what remained functional in the ship. 6 crew members had died in the crash, and 8 more were seriously injured, including Jex and the captain. Lena worked tirelessly with Jack's medical supplies, stabilizing the wounded as best she could. "These medications are saving lives," she told Jack as she applied nano-bandages to a Deltarian engineer's lacerated thorax. "Where did you get them?" "Special requisition from Earth's Xenological Medical Division," Jack replied, helping her hold the bandage in place. "Cost me a month's salary and some favors, but they're designed to work with 90% of known sentient physiologies." Outside, night was falling, bringing with it new sound screeches, howls, and the occasional thump against the ship's hull. The external sensors, now partially repaired, showed multiple life forms gathering around the crash site. "They're attracted to the ship's heat signature," Trill observed from the makeshift command center they'd established in what remained of the mess hall. "And possibly our scent." "Can we get a better look at them?" Jack asked. Mila adjusted the sensor feed. The grainy image showed creatures about the size of large earth dogs, but with 6 limbs and what appeared to be bony plating covering their bodies. "Definitely predatory," she said. "Look at those feeding appendages." "The hull will hold against them," Ryden reassured from his makeshift bed. "But we need to plan for the longer term. How long until rescue?" Jack checked the communications device he'd set up. "The emergency beacon is transmitting, but there's still interference. Best case, a Federation patrol picks up our signal within a week. Worst case." He didn't finish the sentence. "We need to be prepared to survive on this planet indefinitely," Jex concluded, his voice weak but determined. The Viridian diplomat had suffered a punctured lung equivalent, but was recovering thanks to Lena's care and Jack's medical supplies. Exactly, Jack agreed. Tomorrow we need to scout the immediate area, look for water and assess potential resources. The atmosphere is toxic, Mealer reminded him. Jack reached into his backpack again and pulled out a sealed package. Portable atmospheric converter, military grade. It creates a breathable bubble extending about 10 meters from the device. Won't last forever, but gives us a way to move around outside. The aliens exchanged glances. Ryden chuckled, which turned into a pained cough. I believe we owe you an apology, Jack Varley. Your primitive container may be the difference between life and death for us all. Jack shrugged. Let's focus on survival first. Apologies can come later. As the others prepared for sleep, Jack sat by the makeshift command console, monitoring the planet's night cycle. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the predators outside had grown more agitated. He adjusted the ship's remaining power to maintain a consistent internal temperature. Lena joined him, her skin glowing faintly in the dim light. You should rest, she advised. Your body sustained trauma during the crash. I'll sleep later, Jack replied, though his shoulder throbbed and his head pounded. Someone needs to keep watch. You have done this before, she observed. Survived in hostile environments. Jack nodded slowly. Too many times. That's why I'm prepared. He gestured to the backpack, now considerably emptier but still containing vital supplies. When you've watched people die because they lacked a simple tool or medicine, you learn to plan ahead. The others thought your behavior strange, Lena said. In many cultures, carrying physical supplies suggests a lack of trust in technology or communal resources. It's not about trust, Jack explained. It's about contingencies. Technology fails, ships crash, the universe is unpredictable. A particularly loud screech from outside punctuated his point. Something large slammed against the hull, making the ship tremble slightly. Try to get some sleep, Jack told her. Tomorrow will be challenging. Dawn on the Deathworld, if the gradual lightening of the yellow-green sky could be called dawn, brought new threats. The predators had retreated, but the rising temperature activated the planet's fungal spores. They coated the ship's exterior in a fine, caustic powder that began eating through the metal. The hull integrity is dropping in sections exposed to the spores, Trill reported. Estimated breach in 6 hours if the corrosion continues at the current rate. We need to neutralize it, Jack said, digging through his backpack again. He pulled out a small container of blue powder. Basic chemistry. This is an alkaline compound that should neutralize the acidic spores. Should, Mila questioned. Nothing's certain on an unknown world, Jack replied. But we need to try something. Donning one of the filtration masks, Jack prepared to venture outside with Trill, who was the least injured of the mobile crew members. The atmospheric converter would give them a bubble of breathable air, but they'd still need protection from direct contact with the spores. Be careful, Ryden advised from his bed. We can't afford to lose either of you. Jack nodded, double-checking his equipment. We'll start with a small test area. If it works, we'll treat the entire hull. Stepping through the emergency airlock they'd rigged from crash debris and parts from Jack's shelter generator, Jack activated the atmospheric converter. A shimmering field expanded around them, pushing back the toxic air. The relief was immediate cooler, cleaner air replacing the stifling heat and chemical stench. Remarkable technology, Trill commented, his exoskeleton flexing as he moved cautiously forward. The landscape was even more alien up close. What had appeared to be vegetation was actually crystalline formations that moved slightly, as if breathing. The ground was covered in a spongy substance that released yellowish puffs when stepped on. "Watch where you step," Jack warned. "Assume everything is dangerous until proven otherwise." They made their way to a section of hull covered in the corrosive spores. Jack carefully applied the alkaline powder to a small area. The reaction was immediate. The spores fizzled and dissolved, leaving clean metal behind. "It works," Trill exclaimed. "Let's treat the critical areas first," Jack suggested. "We don't have enough for the entire ship." As they worked, Jack noticed movement in the crystalline formations about 50 meters away. "We're being watched," he murmured to Trill. The Arctarian's compound eyes swiveled. "Yes, multiple life forms, not the predators from last night, something else." They continued their task, moving efficiently but keeping the strange creatures in their peripheral vision. The creatures, Jack mentally dubbed them crystal stalkers, never approached closer than 30 meters but followed their movements with swaying, translucent appendages. "They seem curious rather than aggressive," Trill observed. "For now," Jack agreed, "but that could change quickly." They had nearly finished treating the worst affected areas when one of the crystal stalkers suddenly darted forward, crossing half the distance between them in seconds. It stopped, vibrating intensely. "Don't move," Jack whispered, freezing in place. The creature extended what appeared to be sensory filaments toward the edge of their atmospheric bubble. When the filaments touched the boundary, they recoiled violently. The crystal stalker made a high-pitched keening sound and retreated, the others following it back into the crystalline forest. "That was close," Trill said, his exoskeleton clicking with nervous energy. "Let's finish up and get back inside," Jack suggested, eyeing the retreating creatures. "I don't think they liked our air bubble." By the time they returned to the ship, the spore treatment was showing positive results. The corrosion had stopped, and the ship's hull integrity had stabilized. Inside, however, new problems had developed. 3 more crew members are showing signs of infection, Lena reported grimly. "The hull breach in Section 4 exposed them to something before we sealed it. They're developing fever and respiratory distress." Jack checked his medical supplies. "I have broad-spectrum antibiotics, but without knowing exactly what we're dealing with, it's a gamble." "A necessary one," Ryden decided from his bed, where he was now sitting up despite his injuries. "We can't wait for them to deteriorate further." With Lena's guidance, Jack administered the antibiotics to the affected crew members. It was a tense waiting game to see if they would respond to the treatment. Meanwhile, Mila had made progress with the communications array. "I've boosted the signal strength by 20%, she announced. "And I think I've identified the source of the interference. There's a natural radiation belt surrounding this planet that disrupts subspace frequencies." "Can we punch through it?" Jack asked. "Possibly with a focused pulse," Mila replied, "but it would drain our remaining power reserves. We'd have one shot." "Hold off for now," Ryden ordered. "If we drain power and the signal doesn't get through, we lose life support." Jack agreed with the captain's assessment. "We need to establish more security first. Food, water, better shelter if we need to abandon the ship." "Speaking of water," Jack said, his voice stronger than the previous day, "the sensors detected a possible water source 2 kilometers south of our position." "We'll need to check it out," Jack said. "But first, let's see how our patients respond to the antibiotics." By evening, it was clear that the antibiotics were working. The infected crew members' fevers had broken, and their breathing had eased. Lena was cautiously optimistic. "Whatever infected them, your medicine is fighting it," she told Jack. "You've saved their lives." "We're not out of danger yet," Jack reminded her. "We still need sustainable water and food sources if rescue takes longer than expected." The next morning, Jack organized a scouting party to investigate the water source. He, Mila, and one of the recovered engineers named Dorn set out equipped with filtration masks, the atmospheric converter, and water testing equipment from Jack's seemingly bottomless backpack. The journey was tense. The crystal stalkers kept their distance but followed the group's progress. Other life forms scuttled through the undergrowth or circled overhead, all alien, all potentially deadly. "I'm detecting elevated radiation levels ahead," Mila warned as they approached the water source. Jack checked his own scanner, a compact device that had cost him 2 months' salary. "Not immediately dangerous, but we shouldn't linger." The water source turned out to be a small lake with an unusual blue-purple coloration. Steam rose from its surface, despite the ambient temperature not being hot enough to cause evaporation. "Thermal activity underneath," Dorn suggested, his species' natural heat sensitivity allowing him to perceive temperature variations invisible to Jack and Mila. Jack carefully collected a sample in a containment vial from his pack. "We'll test it back at the ship. If it's potable after filtration, this solves one of our biggest problems." As they turned to head back, a low, rumbling sound made them pause. The ground trembled slightly. Seismic activity. Mila wondered. Jack shook his head slowly. "I don't think so." From the lake's center, the water began to bulge upward. Something massive was rising from beneath the surface. "Run," Jack said quietly, then louder. "Run." They sprinted back toward the ship. As a colossal creature breached the lake's surface, a serpentine form with multiple eyes and gaping, tooth-lined vents along its length. It rose 15 meters into the air before crashing back down, sending a wave of the blue-purple water rushing toward the shore. The wave caught the edge of their atmospheric bubble, causing the converter to sputter and briefly fail. Toxic air rushed in, and Jack felt his lungs burn before the device reset and purged the contamination. "Is everyone okay?" he gasped as they continued running. Mila nodded, though her blue skin had taken on a grayish tinge from the brief exposure. Dorn wheezed but gave a thumbs up, a human gesture he'd adopted from the crew. Behind them, the lake creature didn't pursue but sank back beneath the surface, apparently territorial rather than predatory, at least toward things that didn't enter its domain. When they reached the ship, they were met with concerned faces. "We saw the creature through the sensors," Ryden said. "Impressive life form. That's one word for it," Jack replied, handing the water sample to Lena. "Can you analyze this? See if it's safe after filtration?" While Lena worked on the water analysis, Jack briefed the others on what they'd found. The crystal stalkers, the radiation levels, the lake creature, all factors that made their situation even more precarious. "The good news," he concluded, "is that if the water is usable, we have a source. The bad news is that getting to it means navigating past various hostile life forms and dealing with that lake guardian." "We might not need to," Lena announced, looking up from her analysis. "The water contains heavy minerals but no biological contaminants that my tests can detect. With proper filtration, which you conveniently have in your backpack, it should be safe to drink. And I think I can rig a collection system," Dorn added, "using condensation from the atmosphere rather than going directly to the lake." For the first time since the crash, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. Water was solved. The hull was stabilized. The injuries and infections were being treated. They were establishing the basics for longer-term survival. That night, as the crew shared a meal of emergency rations supplemented with a nutritional paste Lena had synthesized from local plants deemed safe, the mood was cautiously optimistic. "A toast," Ryden proposed, raising his cup of filtered water, "to Jack Varley and his foresight. Without his preparation, many of us would already be dead." The crew raised their cups. Even Jex, who had been the most vocal critic of Jack's backpack, nodded respectfully. "I must ask," the Viridian said, "what made you so cautious, beyond your experience on Gamma Hydri Roman 4? Jack took a sip of water before answering. "My father was a frontier colonist. He taught me that space is beautiful but unforgiving. The universe doesn't care if you live or die, he used to say, so you'd better care enough for both of you." "Wise words," Ryden commented. "He died because he forgot his own advice," Jack continued quietly. "Got complacent on a routine survey, didn't pack enough oxygen for his shuttle by the time they found him. He trailed off, then shrugged. Since then, I've never gone anywhere without being prepared for the worst." A moment of silence followed, broken only by the sounds of the Deathworld outside, distant screeches, and the constant, unsettling movement of the crystal formations. "We should attempt the focused communication pulse tomorrow," Mila suggested, changing the subject. "If we time it when this hemisphere is facing toward Federation space, we have the best chance of the signal being detected." "Agreed," Ryden said. "And we should continue exploring the immediate area, building a map of resources and threats." The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Jack led scouting parties during the day, expanding their knowledge of the surrounding territory. They discovered more water sources, identified some edible plant analogs after careful testing, and mapped the territories of the various predator species. Dorn and Mila worked on enhancing the ship's defenses and setting up more permanent shelters using materials from Jack's backpack, combined with local resources. The atmospheric converter was used sparingly to conserve its power cells. Lena continued treating the injured and ill, her medical skills complemented by Jack's supplies. The worst cases were recovering, including Ryden, who was now able to move around with assistance. On the 4th day, they attempted the focused communication pulse. The ship's remaining power was channeled into a single, powerful burst aimed at the nearest Federation outpost. Then they waited, the ship operating on minimal emergency power, everyone tense with anticipation. No response came. "It might take time," Jack reassured the disappointed crew. "Or they might be dispatching help without responding to conserve our power." "Or the signal didn't penetrate the radiation belt," Mila added, voicing what everyone feared. That night, a new threat emerged. The temperature dropped drastically, far lower than previous nights. Frost began forming on the interior of the hull. "Environmental system can't compensate," Trill reported, his exoskeleton vibrating to generate heat. "Power levels too low. For species adapted to warmer environments like Jex and several others, the cold was potentially lethal." Jack dug into his backpack again, pulling out thermal blankets and chemical heat packs. "These will help, but we need a more sustainable solution," he said as he distributed the supplies. "The atmospheric converter," Lena suggested. "Could we use it inside to regulate temperature instead of air quality?" Jack considered this. "It's not designed for that, but I might be able to modify it." He looked at Dorn. "I'll need your help." Working through the night, they repurposed the atmospheric converter to function as a heating system. By morning, the ship's interior had returned to a tolerable temperature, though power consumption was a concern. "We can't run this indefinitely," Jack warned. "We need a more permanent solution." "What about geothermal?" Dorn suggested. "The lake showed thermal activity. There might be heat sources we could tap into." A new expedition was organized, this time focused on finding geothermal vents that could be used to heat the ship. Jack, Dorn, and a recovered Ryden set out, following the scanner's readings toward a promising heat signature 3 kilometers west of their position. The landscape in this direction was different, less crystalline formations, more rocky terrain with deep fissures. Steam escaped from some of the cracks, carrying the sharp scent of sulfur even through their filtration masks. "This is promising," Ryden said, his webbed feet more sure on the uneven ground than Jack's boots. "If we can channel this heat back to the ship." They were mapping a particularly active vent when the ground suddenly shifted beneath them. Jack felt himself falling as a section of rock gave way. He grabbed for purchase but found only loose stones. Ryden lunged for him but missed. Jack tumbled down a steep slope, rocks and debris cascading around him. Pain exploded in his leg as a boulder pinned it against the ground. He cried out, the sound echoing in the narrow fissure he'd fallen into. "Jack," Ryden's voice came from above. "Are you injured?" "My leg," Jack called back, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Pinned under a rock, I can't move it." Dorn's face appeared at the edge of the fissure. "We'll come down to you." "No," Jack shouted. "The slope's unstable, you'll both fall too." He assessed his situation. The boulder wasn't crushing his leg completely, but it had him firmly trapped. He could feel warm blood soaking his pants leg. "I need to free myself first." Jack twisted to reach his backpack, which had miraculously stayed on his shoulders during the fall. Inside, he found a collapsible pry bar, another tool that had earned him mockery from some crew members when they'd spotted it during an earlier inventory. "I'm going to try to move the rock," he called up to his companions. "Stand by." Using the pry bar and ignoring the searing pain in his leg, Jack managed to shift the boulder just enough to pull free. His leg was badly lacerated, possibly fractured, but not crushed. From his backpack, he extracted the first aid kit and quickly applied a pressure bandage and analgesic spray. "I'm free," he reported, "but I can't climb up. The slope's too steep and my leg won't hold my weight." "There must be another way out," Ryden said. "These fissures often connect to larger cavern systems." "We'll follow the edge," Dorn added. "Try to find where the fissure widens or offers an exit. You follow from below." It was a desperate plan, but the only one they had. Jack fashioned a crude crutch from the pry bar and some cord from his pack, then began limping along the bottom of the fissure, following Ryden and Dorn's voices from above. The pain was intense, but the analgesic took the worst edge off. Jack focused on moving forward, one agonizing step at a time. The fissure gradually widened, revealing glowing mineral formations embedded in the walls that provided faint illumination. "I think I see something ahead," Jack called up after nearly an hour of painful progress. "A wider chamber." "We see it too," Ryden confirmed. "There appears to be a more gradual slope there. We might be able to reach you." The chamber turned out to be a large cavern with multiple vents releasing steam. The heat was intense but not unbearable. Most importantly, one side of the cavern sloped gently enough that Ryden and Dorn were able to carefully make their way down. "Your leg looks bad," Ryden observed when they reached Jack. "I'll live," Jack replied, though the pain was worsening as the analgesic began to wear off. "The good news is we've found our geothermal source. These vents could heat the entire ship if we can channel them." "First, we need to get you back and have Lena look at that leg," Dorn insisted. They found an exit on the far side of the cavern, a tunnel that sloped upward toward the surface. The climb was challenging with Jack's injured leg, but with his companion's support, they eventually emerged about half a kilometer from where they'd started. By the time they reached the ship, Jack was feverish and weak from blood loss. Lena immediately took charge, cleaning and properly dressing the wound. "The bone is fractured," she informed him after a thorough examination, "and there's significant tissue damage. You need to stay off it completely for at least a week." "We don't have a week," Jack argued weakly. "We need to set up the geothermal system before the next cold cycle." "Others can do that," Lena insisted. You've provided the tools and knowledge. Now you need to trust your crew to use them. And they did. Over the next few days, as Jack was confined to bed rest, the crew worked together to establish a geothermal heating system. Dorn designed it, Mila and Trill built it, and Ryden organized the work parties. They used materials salvaged from the ship, combined with tools and components from Jack's increasingly famous backpack. Jex, now fully recovered, took charge of cataloging the edible plants they discovered and establishing a small hydroponic garden using seeds from where else Jack's backpack. "You really did think of everything," the Viridian commented as he showed Jack their progress via a portable screen. "Even cultivation materials." "Not everything," Jack admitted, "but enough to buy us time." On the 10th day after the crash, as Jack was finally allowed to move around with a makeshift crutch, the ship's emergency receiver crackled to life. "Nebula Voyager, this is Federation Rescue Vessel Horizon. Do you copy?" The jubilation that swept through the crew was overwhelming. They had survived. Against all odds on a Class X Deathworld, they had established shelter, water, food, and heat. They had treated their injuries and illnesses. They had held out until rescue arrived. As the Horizon landed nearby, its advanced shields easily handling the toxic atmosphere, the crew of the Nebula Voyager gathered for a final meal in their makeshift mess hall. "I propose another toast," Ryden said, raising his cup. "To preparation and foresight. To Jack Varley and his ridiculous backpack." Laughter and cheers filled the room. Jack smiled, his leg propped up but healing well thanks to proper medical care. "I've been thinking," Jex said as the noise died down. "My initial assessment of your behavior was incorrect, Jack. In my culture, we have a saying, true wisdom is seen only in hindsight. I failed to recognize the wisdom in your caution." "We all did," Mila added, "but we've learned." Jack looked around at the alien faces that had become friends through their shared ordeal. "I hope none of you ever need to use what you've learned here. But if you do, we'll remember to pack a backpack," Ryden finished with a grin. The rescue proceeded smoothly. The Federation team was impressed by what the survivors had accomplished under such hostile conditions. The Nebula Voyager was deemed unsalvageable, but all remaining crew were safely transferred to the Horizon. As Jack settled into his new quarters aboard the rescue vessel, he placed his backpack, now nearly empty of supplies, but no less valuable as a symbol, carefully on a shelf. It had saved not just his life, but the lives of the entire crew. The ship's intercom announced their departure from the Deathworld. Jack looked out the viewport as the planet receded, its yellow-green atmosphere and deadly landscape growing smaller. Diplomat Varley, a young Federation officer, appeared at his door. "Captain wants to know if you require any special accommodations for your injury during the journey home." Jack smiled. "No, I'm fine, but I do have one request." "Sir?" "When we reach the nearest station, I need to restock my backpack." The officer nodded seriously. "I believe that can be arranged. In fact, the captain mentioned something about a full resupply at Federation expense, said it was the least they could do." After the officer left, Jack leaned back in his bed, feeling the gentle vibration of the ship entering hyperspace. He thought about the mockery he'd endured for years about his primitive container and excessive preparation. No one would be mocking him now. More importantly, he suspected that when the crew of the Nebula Voyager returned to their respective worlds, backpacks might suddenly become very fashionable among space travelers. The thought made him smile as he drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever the universe threw at him next, he'd be prepared.